I'm thinking of getting married and she wants to live here with you, Mom." His words left me stunned. First, my son announcing his intention to marry. A son who had just turned 40 this year and often lamented, even to me, about not having a girlfriend. Second, it was unusual these days for a bride to be enthusiastic about living with her mother-in-law. Until now, my son and I had shared this 2-bedroom apartment. My husband passed away from overwork before my son started elementary school. Since then, my son and I had supported each other. As a young child, he did his best to help me, even cooking dinner while I worked tirelessly day and night. Even after he grew up and started working, he stayed home, always concerned about me. He cared deeply and didn't want me to be alone and lonely. I had mixed feelings about him, and now he had announced his intention to get married. "You don't have to worry about me. Why don't you find a place where you can live as a couple without any interruptions?" I felt a pang of anxiety about living with a daughter-in-law. Before moving to this apartment, I had lived with my husband's parents in their house. It was an incredibly tough experience. My mother-in-law constantly nagged me, and my father-in-law piled on chores every day. Within a year of marriage, I collapsed and had days when I couldn't even get out of bed. My mother-in-law would try to force me up to do housework. Terrified, I finally confessed everything to my husband. He was genuinely concerned and decided we needed to leave his parents' house. "What kind of daughter-in-law are you, trying to steal our precious son? You can leave by yourself." My mother-in-law continued her tirade until the very last minute before we moved out. My husband turned his back on his parents and brought me to the apartment where we now live. That's why I couldn't agree to live with my son and his wife. No matter how friendly you try to be, your daughter-in-law is still a stranger. Living together will inevitably lead to frustrations. I knew from my bitter experience with my in-laws how hard it would be to endure such a life. With this in mind, I was hesitant to live with my daughter-in-law. Seeing my reluctance, my son decided to bring his future wife to our home. He wanted me to meet her and see what kind of person she was. "Nice to meet you. I hope we can get along." She was 20 years old, much younger than my son. She was a very quiet girl, nervously keeping her eyes cast down. I couldn't help but wonder how such a young girl had met my son and decided to marry him. I couldn't stop wondering. Seeing my confused expression, my son, with a bashful smile, began to explain how they met. He's an instructor at a driving school, and she was one of his students. Most instructors there are pretty strict, but he was really kind, and before I knew it, I fell for him, she shyly explained. My son turned beet red. At first, I was surprised, but seeing the happiness on my son's face, I felt like crying. Finally, a woman had appeared who could support my son. "You say you want to live with us. Are you really sure? If you need financial help, I can assist. Fortunately, I have some savings. If it can support my son and your happiness, I want to help as much as possible." I proposed this sincerely, but she shook her head vigorously. "If you're okay with it, I really want to live together. I want to help out to repay you for all the hard work you've done." What a kind-hearted girl she was. Not only did she care for my son, but she also cared about me, her future mother-in-law. I was both surprised and touched. With her, I thought maybe we could make it work living under the same roof. Before I knew it, I found myself nodding in agreement. And so, my son and she got married, and we all started living together in our apartment. But the new bride turned out to be a surprising character. Just a week into our shared living, I began to feel a sense of unease. "Mother-in-law, let me do all the housework. You take it easy." I had thought she would continue to work even after we lived together, but apparently she hadn't been working even before the marriage, and there was no sign of her getting a job. She did do the housework, but the laundry was sloppy, and frankly, her cooking was not so great. But I felt if I said anything, she might take me as a nagging, difficult mother-in-law, so I chose to bear with it. Wanting to lighten her load a little, I said, "Thank you for always cooking. Let me handle dinner today. Why don't you take a break?" But she refused flatly. "No, I'll do it. Please don't take my work away from me." She stubbornly refused, and from the moment we decided to live together, I found myself unable to step into my own kitchen. Even when I tried to help with cleaning or vacuuming, she would snatch the tasks away with a slightly irritated look on her face. "Listen, mother-in-law, I've already told you it's my job. Please just stay out of it." Her attitude had changed drastically from when we first met after the wedding, leaving me bewildered. With my son working tirelessly to provide for his wife and me, taking on a part-time night job alongside his full-time day job, He often came home late. This left her and me alone in the house for long periods. She complained about almost everything I did, causing me to retreat more into my bedroom. Whenever I emerged for something as simple as using the restroom, I find her casually lounging in the living room, watching TV. I felt increasingly uncomfortable in my own home, often sighing quietly to myself. But that wasn't all. At one point, my son said something that completely surprised me. "Mom, don't you think you're making her work a little too hard? It's not fair to make her do all the housework." "What?" I exclaimed in surprise, my voice involuntarily rising. My son looked at me with a grimace, as though I were the villain. Despite my insistence on doing nothing, she had been portraying herself as the victim and complaining to my son. "I'm not making her do anything. She said she would handle all the housework." "Well, she's your daughter-in-law. Clearly, she's trying to show respect to you. You should appreciate that more. It's not fair to her. She's so young." I was perplexed by my son's reasoning that her youth warranted sympathy, and truthfully, I was hurt that he wouldn't believe my perspective. Since then, I had to be constantly vigilant around her. However, she consistently misinterpreted my intentions, leaving me perpetually troubled and distressed. Still, I would occasionally try to reach out. "Thank you for everything you do. I'll take care of things around the house today. Why don't you go out and relax?" But her responses were always dismissive. "Are you suggesting I'm a burden when I'm home? I'll have dinner with my husband, so you should eat first, mother-in-law." Unbeknownst to my son, who often returned late from work, I found myself eating alone in my bedroom. The silence, without the comforting hum of the television, made me feel unbearably lonely. From the living room, I could hear her laughter echoing through the apartment as she enjoyed her TV show. I began to fear that I would always be seen as an intruder in this home. This situation persisted for nearly a year. One day, after finishing my meal in my room as usual, I reluctantly went to the kitchen to wash the dishes. Avoiding the living room, which had been completely redecorated to fit my daughter-in-law's taste, I hurriedly started washing the dishes. Suddenly, I noticed my daughter-in-law lying on the sofa, slowly getting up. "Excuse me, could you stop it already?" Her first words left me speechless. Confused, I turned to face her as she glared at me. "Don't pretend you don't know," she snapped. "Your late husband built this apartment, right? I found out while cleaning your room the other day. You must have significant savings from the rental income. Why are you letting my husband work while you sit around at home?" Indeed, this apartment, where 8 families, including ours, reside, was built by my late husband for our family's future. He was a successful businessman who made the brave decision to create a separate living space for us, away from his parents. Losing my mother early in life, and with my father happily settled with his second wife, my husband became my sole pillar of support. "Even if something happens to me, I won't let you struggle," he assured me. He constructed this apartment to ensure I could lead a stable life indefinitely. With tenants, it provides a steady income. Yet our son works because he desires independence. Now married, he strives to support his family independently. Unfortunately, it seems his wife misunderstands, blaming me for any struggles he faces because of my presence. The words of my daughter-in-law persisted. Eventually, mothers who can't let go of their children become completely dependent on them financially, right? Frankly, it's annoying. An unemployed person living on a pension like you is holding us back. If you really care about your son, please leave this apartment. I couldn't comprehend what my daughter-in-law was saying at all. After all, wasn't it her idea for us to live together? I couldn't recall ever clinging to my son. "If you find it difficult to say, I'll talk to him directly. This apartment and the inheritance from your late husband belong to him, so I'm sure he'll arrange for you to move to a good nursing home." Ignoring my confrontational daughter-in-law for a moment, I finished washing the dishes. Then, there was one thing I needed to clarify. "Listen, you seem to be mistaken about something, but the landlord of this place is not my son." "Ha!" Her voice carried a hint of confusion, prompting me to sigh inwardly as I continued. "Listen carefully. I appreciate you cleaning my room, but did you go through my belongings without permission?" The property deed for the apartment was tucked away in the back of the drawer. My daughter-in-law's shoulders trembled. Regardless of family ties, rifling through someone's possessions is a serious breach of privacy. You're in the wrong for hiding something that rightfully belongs to him. Why do you have it? Well, because I'm the owner. That's a lie. He told me he was the owner. To silence my daughter-in-law, I showed her the apartment deed. Look, my name is on it. It's not his. She was left speechless. At that moment, my son returned home, sensing the tension in the air and looking concerned. His wife, visibly agitated, thrust the apartment deed at him. Hey, weren't you claiming you're the owner of this apartment? Explain this. Caught off guard by his wife's anger, my son finally looked guilty. He replied, I'm sorry. I just wanted to impress you a little. I wanted to hear you say, wow. It appeared he had told a small lie in hopes of earning praise from his wife. In reality, the apartment would indeed be his once I passed away, so he wasn't entirely wrong. We've been patient until now, haven't we? Let's transfer ownership to you and find a nursing home for your mother. That way, everyone will be happy, don't you think? Nursing home. Our son tried to object, but his wife's determination was relentless. We've struggled through living together when we didn't even want to. Don't we deserve some reward now? I realized it then. She had never truly wanted to live with me. Perhaps she could try to flatter me initially, to make a good impression, but in the end, she found me too burdensome. My son appeared torn for a moment, caught between his wife and me, before finally turning to address me. Mom, I'm sorry. I'll find you a good nursing home, I promise. I won't let you suffer. So could you transfer the ownership of this apartment to me? It was clear my son had chosen to side with his wife. Well, perhaps it was inevitable. A husband should prioritize his wife, yet I had endured much over the past year too. I had no intention of quietly accepting a move to a nursing home. Very well, I'll transfer the ownership of this apartment to you. You can do as you wish, but I will choose my new place myself. With those words, I retreated to my bedroom. On the other side of the door, I could hear my daughter-in-law's triumphant voice. We did it. Now we'll finally be owners of this apartment. My son's voice echoed her excitement. I felt the foundation of the hard work I had shared with my son crumble like a house of cards, but I couldn't afford to be disheartened. I began to plan my next steps. Several days later, true to my word, I transferred ownership of the apartment to my son and swiftly made arrangements to move out. I kept my new residence a secret. Mom, thank you so much. I'll make you proud from now on. Thank you, Mom. We're going to build a happy life together. My son and his wife waved me off cheerfully as I bid them farewell with a forced smile. I settled into a condominium with nursing care services, fulfilling a dream my late husband and I had cherished, a home with views of both mountains and sea. The spacious, serene environment, free from the creaking floors of the old apartment, seemed to bring peace to my soul. Suddenly, my mobile phone rang. It was my son. His voice, filled with anger, reached my ears as I answered. Mom, what's going on? The apartment has a severe termite infestation. They're saying it needs to be completely rebuilt. Just as I suspected, a few months before I moved out, termites had been discovered during a building inspection. The aging structure had prompted me to consider rebuilding, but with my son's busy schedule and no opportunity to discuss it, I had handled it myself. I had informed the other tenants ahead of time, and they had agreed to relocate without issue. Despite the mass exodus, my son and daughter-in-law seemed unaware of the urgency of the situation. The apartment is yours now, isn't it? Whether you rebuild it or demolish it, it's up to you. What? Both options are incredibly expensive. I can't afford it. Can't you contribute a little? Absolutely not. This discussion is closed. Truthfully, I had a substantial sum of money, savings from investing my late husband's inheritance, totaling $1 million. Originally intended for my son's future, my feelings had shifted. That's why I could use it openly as a down payment for this condominium. My daughter-in-law interjected on the phone. Why hasn't your son inherited a single cent from his father's estate? This isn't fair. That's not what we agreed on. Before my husband passed away, he left me a will bequeathing all his property to me. He had been concerned about his parents' greed and their potential influence over our son, his grandson. Thankfully, I had severed all ties with my in-laws after we parted ways. Afterward, my son spent all his savings on demolishing the apartment. His plan was to sell the land once cleared, but it turned out the property was leased from a third party, and per the agreement, it had to be returned after demolition. With his hopes of profiting dashed, the couple found themselves financially destitute. To maintain her preferred lifestyle, my son's wife refused to compromise, leading him to work tirelessly day and night. I changed my phone number to avoid their calls, yet somehow they discovered my address. sending me letters every month. I discarded them unread. I cherished my peaceful, solitary life too much to let anyone disrupt it. Outside my window, the azure sea and lush trees basked in sunlight. Beside my bed, my late husband's portrait smiled at me. You could help him, you know. I'm not so sure about his wife, though. His words felt directed at me, urging me to reconsider. 3.5